Well, no, he just keeps coming in as a. So it's the first one of the week, as you can tell. We're just figuring out those teething problems. Um, he keeps being there as a person. Just hold tight, guys. We'll be with you. Wonderful, thanks. Yeah, really good to see you. We're a bit um little bit caning the Wi-Fi bandwidth here. Um, you're a very pixely man, but you know maybe that's a good look for you, pixely.
Yeah, I'm basically wearing my wearing my square today.
Yeah. Cool. So we get started in like 3-4 minutes, I think. If you want to just, I don't know if you want to mute for that 3 or 4 minutes, or if you just want to tell us your best dad joke, or you want to make a cup of tea, or you want to do whatever.
Coffee
All
ready.
of that is
Dad
fine.
joke's not funny. I think I'll mute.
Good idea. Cool. All right, we'll give it 3 minutes and then we'll get started.
Let's just check who's here. Do you take a snapshot of who's there afterwards?
Yeah.
Register.
So, guys, we'll be getting started in 2 or 3 minutes. Just checking you can hear us loud and clear through this microphone. Woohoo! Okay. Let's mute them. All right, morning everyone. Welcome to the first event of our mini jam 2 industry days that we've got lined up for you. We've got loads of really interesting people from a whole variety of different backgrounds. Regardless of what media course you're on, the point here really is to give you the opportunity to get a broad overview of some of the career paths that exist in media. You know, when you're young, as you guys are, you might have one idea of what you want to do. That might shift. People move sideways in media, people move forwards, people go backwards, but I guess it happens. So whatever course you're, I think you'll get loads out of engaging with these talks and getting a little bit of an insight into how it goes outside of your little sphere of interest at the moment. So we are being joined this morning by Matt Hall. Matt is a man with a frankly horrifying number of years experience in
You're horrified.
In journalism, but also very much related sectors around digital content. So we're going to be right from Matt and Mr. Turpin here with double matting, because Mr. Turpin here is going to take the lead with, I think you might be muted, by the way. Like, not your microphone, but your speakers.
Oh, yeah.
I want them on me. Just pull that up there. That's it. I don't know. Yeah. There we go. Hey, Matt, can you hear
Hello.
us?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we'll hand over to Matt in a minute, because it's the very first one. I wanted to just lay down a few ground rules. So we have a Q&A tab, and please do put some questions in for Matt or for all the speakers. It's absolutely brilliant to have your questions, to hear them, and to be able to put them to these industry professionals. But the Q&A, that we want you to put questions. There's a chat section. You can be a little bit more silly in that, but please don't just fill it with endless memes, and please ensure your behaviour is appropriate and your comments are appropriate in that section. But yeah, do hit us with your Q&A in the Q&A section. Try and get as much out of this as you can. We do have, for those of you who've never done one of these before, which should be quite a lot of you, you are automatically set up on mute, cameras off, because otherwise it'd be carnage. We have 197 people on this event. 200, bloody hell. So that's why you're muted, but do make use of the Q&A. I think I'm basically just waffling. Just don't make anything too stupid in the chat. Use the Q&A and enjoy the experience. I'm going to hand over to Matt and Matt.
Right. Hello. My students obviously know me. If you don't know me, I'm Matt Turpin. I run the journalism course. And welcome to John. We have here someone who has what John has said, a very deep and wide experience of modern journalism. Matt Squared, I just got in the comments there. That's lovely. And we're going to talk today about that. Now, one of the purposes is to look at what people are actually doing in news, what people have done, changes in the industry. I'm going to get news from the coalface of that. There's not many better people to talk to than Matt Hall. Well, let's go back. Now your career was largely based around digital, it's largely based around podcasts, but obviously you're from an age, I'm from an age, well before the digital revolution happened, back in the days of analog. Can you tell us a little bit about your early career here?
Yeah, I was and still am, a radio and audio obsessed. When I was a kid, I used to love listening to radio. Used to get really kind of intrigued about the people on it and how they did what they did. I did A-levels at my school in Bristol, and I went from there to a BA course in media and media studies, and from there to a postgrad course in radio journalism. I started. I got a couple of bits of work experience at the BBC in London, in Broadcasting House, working on their in a department called Youth Programmes, which were documentaries for social action documentaries for all of the BBC networks, so Radio 4 and especially Radio 1. So I made we used to make campaign stuff for Radio 1 on. I remember doing a housing homeless campaign. I remember doing a register the vote campaign, sexual health, to different kind of social actions that I did, and that was basically going around the country, interviewing people, making sure that it was kind of the voices of people that we were talking to and making content for, because Radio 1 was a very different beast then to what it was now. So it was kind of the overhang of the kind of stuff. So this was around the kind of and the beginning of so it was still a lot of the lineup were quite let's say on the more mature end of the presenter scale, and it had quite a didn't have a particularly cool or youthful outlook, but yeah, so we wanted to make sure that the people that we were talking to were actually hearing back out, which has become much more of a kind of thing with BBC broadcasting over the last few decades, which is only a good thing. And so I went to BBC for like 6 years, eventually being a producer on Radio 1 for specialist music shows, but also Top 40, which at that time was the biggest show in UK radio. Afternoon, people actually used to sit around and listen to see what was going to be number one, which is quite a strange thing to think about now. And then from there, I went to work at. I went transferred to another part of the BBC, which was BBC Online, where they were really starting to kind of develop their kind of web and online offerings. So that was the first thing that was.
What would that be about? Millennium, around 2000?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
What's the attraction what sort of attraction to audio in the first place? When you set up on a career in the media, why did you choose audio? Because it's I mean, it still probably holds the same today. You've got journalists who are fascinated with writing, actually text-based journalism. You have more broadcast, more film journalism, but audio journalism has always been, very popular. What is the attraction to that?
Well, for me, right at the beginning, I realised how you made it. that I realised that actually the best thing about it, and the thing that excited me about it, was that and this is still true, that you can do everything on your own. You can come up with the idea, you can write the treatment, you can set up the interviews, go and do the interviews, do the edit, do the mix, publish. It can be. I'm not saying this is the best thing. I'm not saying you should do this all the time. It's very much you don't depend on anyone else. If you're working in print, you've got an editor that you and you've got to get someone to take the photos, and you've got to someone to do the layout. And if you work in TV, invariably you'll have a kind of you have a cameraman and a light man and somebody else edit, and so it's a lot. Whereas actually, radio it kind of stands, and you can do it all on your own. Now, I'm not saying that's a good idea, and in fact, throughout my career, I've realised that actually it works much better if you're collaborative. But that was what kind of originally made me excited about radio. And
the sort of low entry points of it.
And a lot of those
the total creative control.
Yeah, a lot of those first things that I did, and a lot of when you make kind of radio documentaries for the BBC, and kind of they can be on. Trying to think what I did. I did a thing on kind of British holiday resorts for Radio 4, or I did a thing for Radio 1 on the birth of drum and bass right back in the early days. Those things I did pretty much make on my own. At the very last minute, took it into by kind of somebody who could do what I could do. But that's to an extent, that's that's what I love about podcasting as well. Actually, you can an idea, and
it's amazing stuff in video was under. You have this sort of idea that there's a massive production team. You've got talent who goes out, does the actual voices, does the actual interview and whatnot, and then write it down and produce it in various ways. And when I've actually worked on radio shows, there's a Radio 4 comedy show Mark Steele does, a comedian Mark Steele, and I helped out on that, and it's 3-person, and it's very pin and dip out sort of thing on a very gentle basis, but with and that's it. And with the TV studio, you were talking figures easy.
Yeah, that was always the thing when you start. When podcasts are the main thing, very good, really well made and really intense, and kind of true crime stuff, things that you get from the States, things like Serial and those big kind of multi-part kind of true crime things. It always used to make me a little bit cross, where they'd get to the end of the show and they'd go through the credits, and 15 people on the credits show, and I was like, that's not what And fair enough, they all did a job, and it's great that people get away with it, but at the same time, you're thinking, hold on, why do you need to credit? Why do you need to? This isn't. But anyway,
So back millennium, you got involved in you sort of Solvay, the Windows Blackberry Digital, and moved across to that. There's a lot of skeptics about how much the internet and the World Wide Web and everything would actually impact journalism, but you saw was it something you could see happening? Were you predicting that, or there were a lot of naysayers saying this was a bubble, this was a fad?
I think, maybe I'd like to say that I have a fantastic kind of crystal ball that I could see exactly what. It was more the fact it really excited me. I really enjoyed it. I was thinking the other day, when I was at Radio 1 as a producer, I went I went to the kind of bosses and said, there's this really amazing thing, and it'd be a brilliant resource for programs, and it's called the internet. It's brilliant, and it took ages to get basically my computer in Radio 1 in the whole building. So out of all the producers and all the program assistants and presenters and everything, all the offices all had computers. The only one that was connected to the internet was my computer, because I had to get a special dispensation from BBC Technology or whatever, or whatever, to do it. And anybody who wanted to use the internet had to come into my office, and I had to kind of step out or step away from my desk while they found out what was number one in London, in America, like 25 years ago or something. It was crazy, and there was such a suspicion about it, such a kind of a real kind of feeling that it was something which was A, was a flash in the pan, and B, but potentially quite dangerous. We can all take views on whether or not that was right or not, but it was that excited me. That possibility of getting information and talking to people and how you could do with it was really exciting, and that was why I got into it. Basically.
Yeah, and you through the noughties, you were working in that field. Also, that's when podcasts came onto your radar. Yeah.
So
podcasts were incredibly niche at one point, and we didn't have pre-Spotify. Again, for a lot of the people who are watching this, there was a time for Spotify. There was always Apple Music, but there was a time before you could really stream things easily, and often podcasts were downloads. What was those early days of podcasts like? It seems quite Wild West to me. When
they were great, they were really great. They were kind of they were really great. So basically, yeah. So I worked at an independent production company called Something Else, who made a lot of radio shows for the BBC, and that's when you start to kind of start to hear about this thing called podcasting, and kind of if you bought one of the early iPhones, and this was the big kind of leap in podcasting. Previous to that, people have been sharing links and putting stuff on sites, and there wasn't a kind of central aggregator. And the iPhone was, I can't remember which model it was, but it was back in when it was just a 5 or a 3 or a 2 or something. Excuse me. Basically, came bundled with an iPhone with a podcast app, and it was this little kind of the same little logo as they have at the moment, a kind of little microphone with a kind of sound waves coming out of it. And all of a sudden, you could click on that button and see podcasts from all over the world, and it was just really, really exciting. And it was quite often people sat in a garage or in a bedroom just talking about stuff with other people, and it was very techy. There was an awful lot of them were about kind of technology and about coding and about the internet, and there were some really kind of interesting things. It was just a really exciting way to get information out, and the realization that you could do it really cheaply. All you needed was an internet connection, something to record onto, and a microphone, and that was it.
But it was very easy to actually produce, but actually, as it wasn't, as you say, there wasn't some sort of aggregator like Spotify or anything like that. It was pretty hard to. It was pretty hard to actually, as a listener, to find out about them.
But that was kind of that was part of the attraction. It was kind of same thing as it was like it was the fact that you had to track down, and when you found something you liked, it really felt like you were in a little club. It still amazes me. Yeah. I still think sometimes, when I'm kind of in a Facebook group or about a subject that I really like, and then you realise that there's actually thousands of other people out there that are all in this Facebook group, whereas you've actually, and with podcasting that's the same. It's kind of like you're feeling like you're being spoken to by someone who's just talking to you. My favourite definition of what works for a podcast, and it's the thing that I heard years ago. It's something that I still think is really valid and works. The best sort of podcast is when you've got a group of people talking, and for you to the listener, it's like you're in a cafe and you're sat at a table, and there's a group of really, really interesting people talking at the next table, and you're kind of eavesdropping. And that's what it sounds like. That's what the best ones to sound like. It's a really unfiltered conversation that you're kind of feeling not part of, but that you're feeling that you're overhearing and really enjoying.
I think that's why it's so popular. It's very much in the mold of social media, where you, for instance, Instagram, you can instantly communicate with stars that were once remote. Heroes that once would be hidden behind lots of veils of publicity. My notifications are wild here for some reason, and now that's very much. Now we can communicate directly, and podcasts are very much like that. They're a lot more intimate than, say, radio. Some radio programs, obviously, but you still have this feeling that this is people who are like you, talking to you, and they're very easily reachable. And one of the first big podcasts was obviously Ricky Gervais's podcast back in the what would it be, about 2006, I think it was.
Yeah.
That was the one that broke through. How did that affect the industry? Because that was the one that I think went past 1 million downloads on the Guardian.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was, and typically, he's obviously kind of developed quite a problematic figure in some people's lives. But he had the idea of sitting around with a couple of mates and chatting nonsense, and it was really entertaining. And he went to the Guardian and said, you've got a website that at that point was one of the kind of biggest and most read websites in the country, and probably the world as well in terms of news.
Yeah.
They didn't have kind of subscriptions and stuff, so anyone could go into it and go onto it. And he said, look, would you put this up? It's a series I've done. It's kind of 6 episodes, and let's see if it works. And he was hot at that point. He'd just come off that the TV show The Office.
Mm-hmm.
So they did it, and it flew, and it flew, and it flew, and it flew, and it flew to such an extent that about kind of 10 years later, I was chatting to somebody at Apple Podcasts about the charts that they do, which quite frequently is seen as a kind of barometer of what's successful or what's not successful in the podcast world, and they were saying that if they actually did it straight by the numbers and didn't put an algorithm in to highlight kind of new stuff, but at that point the Ricky Gervais podcast would have been number 1 since it had come out, and would still be number 1 because it was just the biggest thing.
Really? So it's still it still has a command.
Yeah.
So you then moved to the Guardian and helped them develop their digital offering. What does that involve exactly? What this was like when a time when the Guardian, my journalists will know this hopefully, but the Guardian is was a newspaper in the UK, originally set up in Manchester.
They'd probably say it still is.
They still have that as a core, but I don't think very few people actually pick up a physical newspaper these days. But it saw how things were changing and swiftly managed to get itself online and relevant online, and still offers a very decent digital offer. You were part of that. What was that like? Did it often feel that you might be barking up the wrong tree here, or that this wasn't ideas that you had then weren't actually going to didn't have a future in front of them?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think that again, it was really exciting. The Guardian were really forward thinking, and part of that, which is kind of quite dull and in the weeds, so it's not really for this conversation. Part of that is the way they are funded, so they don't have shareholders. They do have a trust, and they have an awfully large bank account which funds them. Yeah. Which is comes from a thing called the Scott Trust. That enables them to take decisions and take punts on things that maybe other media organisations that are more in beholden to shareholders would maybe balk at. And one of the things that they did, and there was a woman who now runs, is at the Columbia University in the US in New York, and runs their journalism school. She's a woman called Emily Bell, and she was the digital director at that time, and she's a really kind of she has good foresight, let's say. And she was really important in driving the Guardian kind of digital offering, not just the like the whole website, of which they decided that they wanted to make podcasting a part, and not just podcasting but multimedia. And so now, actually, whereas podcasting was kind of the prime, what do I say, the prime non text offering that they gave. Now a lot of it's in video. But podcasting was a way that they thought they could spread the word about their journalism. And so they brought so I joined them when they just launched a football show, which was called Football Weekly, which rapidly we started doing 2 episodes a week, but it was still called Football Weekly, and it still is, rather counterintuitively. And that became the biggest. That was just became a phenomenon, and it was just a really. We were fortunate in that we had a really good presenter, a guy called James Richardson, who had been on TV, and so he had a following of kind of and football was becoming kind of quite hip at that time, and it was kind of Euro '96 and all, a lot of different things going on that were that kind of came together. And the idea that we had, and it was I think it's still a kind of revolutionary idea, and it's still one that's not necessarily been taken up by mainstream broadcasters, which is a shame, was that actually sometimes the best people to talk about football aren't people who played football.
For sure.
There are a lot of people out there who haven't played football who talk about football really well. And so what we did was get a lot of Guardian football journalists. And actually quite often there were times where we were told, actually, you have to have a footballer on this. We've signed this guy to do a column for a World Cup or whatever, and so we'll get him on to he'll do things on the podcast. And they just didn't get it. These ex-footballers came on who were just, and now I think it'd be different, but they were just like, what are these people talking about, and why are they kind of joking about it, and why are they being humorous about it? And because it was just like totally unlike any other kind of football media at that time, and it was brilliant. And so that went really well, and so we rolled out a books podcast, we rolled out a technology podcast, a science podcast. These are all kind of based around different sections of the Guardian website. And so they had, so the thing was that it was fairly cheap to make, because they had the expert journalists already there who had the contacts and could present most of the time. We had to tell some people they weren't the best choice as presenters, but that was you always have to have with people, and it just went, it flew, and the Guardian were the kind of the real standard bearers in terms of British media about podcasting, like way before the BBC got involved, way before Sky or any of the other kind of broadcasters got involved. The Guardian were there, and that was a really exciting time, and it really felt like we were doing stuff that nobody else was doing, but you could see was going to work. The big problem then and the big problem now with podcasting is that it doesn't make any money. So we can get onto that, but that was
I think you just answered the questions that is most in the Q&A.
Right,
what's the money in podcasting?
Yeah, I mean there is money, but it's there's a lot of money for the right podcasts, and that get to a large enough number of downloads and listeners and stuff, and then advertisers are interested. But that takes a lot of time, and I would certainly say don't go into podcasting if your main object is to make a lot of money. It might happen, but it's not a certainty.
Yeah, and what is the model? I mean, this is something that students ask occasionally to me. Is podcasting is a relatively new media form, and some people, as you say, at the top end make an absolute fortune. The Gary Linekers of the world here will make an absolute fortune with Joe Rogan's and whatnot, but the vast majority don't. What is the business model for most podcasts? How do they actually try to keep themselves going?
So the business model is through sponsorship and advertising, and the main way of accessing that is through the platforms that people use to publish their podcasts. So in the UK, and actually probably worldwide now, the two main platforms are Spotify, and Acast. And
Yeah.
what happens? You sign up your podcast. You come up with an idea and you make it, and it's great. And you sign up your podcast, and invariably it's free. So it doesn't cost anything it's kind of like YouTube, okay? In that it's a model where you can access it for free, but the platform then puts advertising around your content, and that's what happens in terms of podcasting as well. Actually, people do put podcasts on YouTube as well, and obviously the platforms like creators that have that make decent content and that attract an audience, and once that audience starts growing, then you start to get a cut of the ads that are placed, and Spotify and certainly Acast also have a marketplace where they place sponsors around your content. So if you start to achieve a decent level of listens per week or per episode, then they will get in touch with you and say, we've got a sponsorship read that we want you to read out, and would you be up for doing it? And so they do that, and then you add that to your kind of tips, and then you get a little bit more money, and as it grows and grows and grows, they'll start selling sponsorships specifically around your podcast. So then they'll come to you and go, we've got this client and they really like your audience, and they want to attract, they want to speak to your audience, and here's some more money to do this specific read for them. So that then is how it grows, and then eventually you get to the kind of,
and it's a lot of micro payments as well. Seems to be a common thing, is that they'll have Patreon channels, they'll have Ko-Fi channels and things like that, where fans can make payments more or less directly to the artist, rather than sort of have to go through an advertising route and all that. Is that sustainable? I know a few people who do make a living off that. Others just gives them a bit of money.
Yeah, well, again, it depends on your numbers. It depends on how what kind of audience you attract, and how invested they are in your content. So for some people, they can make a few £1,000 a month out of their Patreon. Others, as you say, it's kind of but then again, the other, and then in terms of other revenue streams, you can maybe start doing live events, depending on the kind of format of your podcast. If it's an interview show or a discussion show, then you can start kind of hiring a theatre and selling tickets, and that works as well. And so there's now a kind of like a podcast circuit. There's podcast festivals, so there are kind of other ways to do it. But it all basically comes from being successful and attracting an audience that advertisers want to reach, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the problems I think with podcasts these days, one of the complaints that's often levelled against it is that there's a lot of quantity there. There is, everyone has a podcast these days, because the start costs are extremely low. The buy-in is very low. You don't need a great capital budget to actually go in there. You can set a podcast up anywhere. But quality, do you think quality will show through? Do you think quality is what's going to as other podcasts sort of just failed to make the grade, will sort of coalesce around some quality?
I guess the question that I would ask you is, who defines what's quality?
That's true. Okay, let's take two things here. One would be production quality. If something's actually nice to listen to, it's made in a proper studio, like I'm sitting in now. But also, if it's attracting the right guest, if it is sufficiently interesting and just isn't a big name attached to it.
Yeah, I think that. So there's some kind of crazy stat that I can't remember the exact figures of, which is bad of me. But basically, okay, let's say there's 1 million podcasts on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah,
that's not the right number. This is just an example, of which at any one time maybe 10,000 are live. So basically, the problem is it's kind of like YouTube, I guess.
Yeah.
Using an example that everyone will understand. There are a lot of podcasts, but not that many of them are still continuing. There's a lot of podcasts that people have one or two episodes of, and then realise that actually this is quite hard work.
Yeah.
And it takes quite a lot of time and effort to make something. So actually they'll make 2 of them and then stop. And it's kind of like, you know, I think that what needs to happen at some point is there needs to be a cull of
Yeah.
of kind of dead wood, and there probably won't be, because it's a really, A, how do you do that? B, who makes those decisions? And C, what kind of process do you go through for that to be the case, for things to be taken out? Because actually then you're going back on the whole brilliant point of the internet, and the fact that anyone can make it and they can put stuff up there, and you might just stumble on something from kind of 8 years ago which is no longer in production, but which has some really great information for you, and that works really well. For instance, I guess there's that kind of like You, Me, and the Big C Cancer podcast, which is being made at the moment, but it's still really important in terms of a resource.
People can use it as a archive resource almost.
Yeah, but having said that, I think that yes, because if you're making a podcast if you're making sounds rubbish and you don't include jokes, not many people listen to that, and then therefore you're not gonna, you're not as a presenter and as a maker, as a producer and a content maker. If you're not getting feedback about something, nobody's actually paying attention to it, listen to it. Why are you going to carry on making it? Why not go away?
Yeah, a lot do seem like it seemed a good idea, but weren't very thought through. Well, the ones I seem to like, that seem to be successful, one I do have a definite, almost rationale behind them. They'll have something they're trying to find out and go for it. There's lots of, I don't know, 3 men in a pub discussing football, or 3 men in a pub discussing music and stuff, and they tend to be they seem to be dropping off a lot now.
Well, I think the worst thing about podcasts, and the thing that kind of made me kind of a little bit bored of them a few years ago, was the realization that there was an awful lot of white, middle-aged, middle-class men sat around talking about stuff to their white, middle-class mates. I have to hold my hand up here. So
I was about to say, we're 2 white middle-class. Well, I don't know if I'm middle-class, so but we'll say middle-aged. We're 2 white middle-aged men sitting around talking about white middle-aged men here. So we are the
but we recognise the problem, Matt. Which is
we do. So yeah, we're trying to destroy ourselves in this.
Yes.
I'm going to throw it open to a few questions to the students now, because we've got quite a few come in. Actually, loads come in. One from Vanessa here, one of my journalism students, is: do you think podcasting could lose some of its appeal in the future, especially with how fast AI is developing? I suppose this is quite a huge question, in the fact that there are actually AI podcasts there out there at the moment, where they either they work off a script, or they actually develop content through AI and then turn it into a voice and then broadcast it like that, almost fully automated. Point AI at a subject and let it do the rest of the work. Obviously, do you think that will be a threat, or do you think we still crave the authentic?
Yeah, so there was a thing, I don't know if you heard about this a couple of maybe a month ago or so ago. So Wondery, which was a big US podcast production company, folded. It got bought, and it got bought a bit ago, and it got folded. A lot of people got laid off. One of the people who got laid off was their CEO, and they basically came up with a company that produced AI podcasts, and they were dreadful. Yeah. But it made a huge number of them. It just basically churned them out, and it was working on that micropayments theory, that they put out so many that if they were only listened to like 5 times each, they made enough money for the company to make it worthwhile, which is a horrible idea.
For sure.
But it was really encouraging to see how the kind of podcast community and industry rallied around and went, "This is just disgusting. This is a dreadful business model. And B, it's just going to totally destroy people's faith in podcasts." And I think there is still that what you were just saying about authenticity and communication with real people. I think that's the kind of main. For me, that's the best thing about podcasting, and I love to be able to hear, I love to be able to hear about the experience of somebody living on the other side of the world, telling me a story that I've never heard before or even considered, and that's what makes podcasting great. So my hope is that, to answer your question, Vanessa, is that that I think podcasting will still be around. I think more interesting is how will it develop. So assuming that AI won't make inroads to it because people like hearing real voices, but at what point does a podcast become a video? What point does podcast become kind of a TikTok? What time? Actually, my idea of a podcast is long form, say 15 minutes or more, up to, if you listen to Joe Rogan, and please don't listen to Joe Rogan, 2.5 hours, 3 hours long for one episode. But I think that's what makes podcasting interesting. It goes for one of the things, it goes for as long as it needs to go for. Whereas obviously, if you're looking at video and watching stuff on your phone, then you're not the attention span, but the format is naturally much more truncated. And so I think that there are interesting things about how we communicate, how the podcast, how podcasts change in answer to those short form things. And is it an alternative? Do you use your videos when you want to kind of quick hit on the bus on the way to college, and do you use your podcasts when you're kind of sat home in your bed relaxing, or kind of do they provide an alternative?
I suppose this is another thing you touched on then, which has come up in the questions, so I can't find it. I've been looking through a Q&A, I can't find it, but I'll take it from what I can remember. Is that the fact very, very few podcasts are just podcasts these days. They'll have a presence on social media, whether it's through clipping. Often they're vodcasts more than often now. You'll have a camera in now, which some I listen to. I don't really want to see the people, but Spotify defaults to that. No offense to people in it, it's just faces for radio, and they seem to be increasingly cropping up on TikTok and stuff like that. Where do you think it's going? What do you think this is going to continue, or do you think that the core is going to still be purely audio?
Well, the important thing to say is that I'm not a fan of video in podcasts. I think the other reason, when you go back and say, why did you like getting into radio and why did you like getting into audio, is I've always loved it because, and there's a bit about terminology here, is I always regarded it as a really active medium, in that you can do other stuff while you're consuming it. That you can be making dinner, you can be going to the gym, you can be walking the dog, you can be in the bath, that you can be doing other stuff while you're consuming it. As soon as you put video in that equation, that changes. All of a sudden it becomes a very passive medium, and that you have to concentrate on it. You're watching something, and it's interesting because the reason that companies and the platforms want video to be part of the podcast equation is because simply the advertising rates for video are a lot more than the advertising rates for audio. So they get more money and they know how to sell ads. They know how to sell video ads around video. It's why YouTube is now, in many markets, in many countries, the second or the first biggest platform for podcasting, because they've made it very attractive for podcasters. And when you look at how people use podcasts on YouTube, quite often they open it in a different window, and then they're working or doing something in a window. It's behind the stuff that their screen. Which YouTube love, because YouTube love connection, and they love as longer play out as possible. And of course, brilliant thing about podcasts, if they're an hour or more long, then you put them on, and they'll get all of that kind of engagement for that length of time, and and that's why they love it. And so that is the kind of main reason why I think video is being pushed as part of the podcast offering. That's not to say that actually, what another thing that Joe Rogan did, which was really clever, is the clipping and the kind of and basically turning around an awful lot of the content from his kind of like 2 hour plus podcast into like 5 minute, 2 minute, 30-second clips. Then will go out on lots of different platforms and in lots of different pop up in lots of different guises, and so you're consuming it in 30-second chunks, 2-minute chunks, 5-minute chunks, 2-hour long chunks, and maybe the 2-hour video is not something you'd watch, but the 30-second or the 2-minute one is what kind of gets the hits. So that's, so I think the video does have a part to play, but I think that the idea of video as a kind of replacing, of recording something in a studio with cameras and lights is not something that I think is especially a good way forward. And the other thing, of course, is it does that then, we've kind of alluded to barriers to entry, that actually all it takes is a microphone, a really good idea, and some decent and a kind of decent recording kit. As soon as you're talking video, that goes up an awful lot.
Prohibitive. For instance, I mean, someone's actually made a clip comment in the comments. George Wilson saying clip farming is, a lot of the reason that we do that. If you film, then you've got little clips you can drop into, which is a lot more difficult if it's purely audio.
Yeah. And the other thing is, it's a lot more difficult. The other thing the reason I don't like it is because then it restricts podcasting to one format. It restricts podcasting to the round table discussion or the kind of because it's easy to video that. If you're making actually a quite complex documentary where you're going to different places and you're interviewing people in different parts of the world or the country or the town or whatever, all of a sudden lugging video around and getting video for all of that, and when you and also when you edit something, if you've got a kind of a discussion with a bunch of people sat around the table, if you need to edit, if they swear or there's a pause, you can do that easily around the table. If you're making something that's actually quite tightly edited, it becomes really complicated in video. All of a sudden you need B-roll and you need cutaways and you need stills.
For sure. It becomes a more production rather than
a kind of production.
Okay. I'm just going to ask if students can actually, if they do want to ask questions, stick them in the Q&A, not in the comments, please. But there is a good one that did come through, which one I've been thinking as well, is that many of my students I've noticed over the years have been decreasingly listeners of radio, standard radio, what we call linear radio, linear audio, I suppose we'd call it now. But the amount at which you listen to podcasts, engage with podcasts, has grown exponentially. Do you think there's any room for linear radio these days? The BBC obviously have BBC One, which when I was younger, you were younger, for instance, you worked for a chart show, everybody would have listened to that. Blur versus Oasis, everyone tuned in to find out who'd won that. Nowadays, very few do. So BBC One, BBC Two, Radio 1, Radio 2, Radio 4, Radio 5, etc. 6. Are they irrelevant in the days of podcasts when we can we pick and choose, or is there still a need for live radio?
That's a really good question. I think the great thing about live radio, I think it's really interesting if you listen to the BBC, to BBC network radio, and especially music radio. So, kind of 1Xtra, 6 Music, Radio 1, Radio 2. It really feels to me as though there's been a conscious decision over the last few years to ensure that the presenters are referencing the communication that they're getting. So they all now have kind of you can send messages on voice activated devices. You can kind of text and you can kind of WhatsApp stations, and those communications are referenced much more by the presenters. Like literally every link, in between every record, there's George from Newcastle loves that one. So and so, Stacey from Bromsgrove is dancing around her kitchen and stuff. And it's a real, I think it's a conscious effort by the stations to make people feel they're part of a community, to make people feel there's more people out there listening to it, and kind of, and that's always been a bit the case, but it's certainly, I think it's stepped up over the last few years. So I think there is and I think that gives you something that you can't get from a Spotify playlist or a stream. However, what I used music radio for when I was a kid, when I was growing up, was as a trusted voice to tell me what was good, a kind of critical voice. So if something was played on Radio 1 evening kind of radio, you'd probably it was bands that you liked and musicians that you liked, and that was the only way to get to hear them. Obviously you've got there's way more ways to actually hear that.
Oh,
and you've
sure,
got much more kind of critical, you know, and you've got much more kind of critical people out there. But having said that, I'd be interested. I don't know if there's any way to do a kind of public vote on this, if people raise their hands. But you know, how many people, you know, listen to Fire in the Booth, but not live, but you know, the kind of Charlie Sloth thing, or kind of listen to kind of, you know, listen to kind of stuff on by you know, SB, I don't know, is SBTV still going? You know, how many people kind of use those channels, maybe not live, but get that kind of critical kind of acceptance from different stations and different networks and different platforms. And I think that's where I think linear radio is probably going to be struggling a bit.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as you say, it was very hard. Back, you know, before Spotify and before the internet, I suppose, to actually get access to music and get access to anything. Now there's such everything's out there, everything's available. A lot of the USP of listening to radio, you know, we used to back in the day, you'd record music live from a radio just to like hear a song, and you'd listen out for a song. Now you can press a button on Spotify, have it instantly. So it does seem one of its USPs. I think.
Yeah, not just that, but you know, I've got artists that I like and follow on Spotify, and Spotify now sends me notifications when they've got new material out. You know, and so they've taken out that gatekeeper of the radio, when that was the only way for getting kind of to listen to what your favorite artists were kind of putting out.
Yeah. It is a different, you know, stuff like if you were into different music, listen to John Peel, or you listen to the Evening Session and stuff, and that's the only place you'd ever hear that, unless you went to a nightclub that played it, or you had enough money to actually buy the records from a record shop. Nowadays, it's a lot more, you know, sort of and it does make you wonder where radio sits in all that. But moving on to a few more student questions, let's just have a look. I've got a strange one here, but I think I'm going to ask it anyway. From Lee Beckworth Morris, is what was the most wholesome moment in your entire career? I mean, that's very left field.
Wholesome moment. Wow.
Wholesome.
Wholesome moment. Well, I'm gonna prevaricate here while I think on. The things that I'm kind of proudest of are,
I think defining. We could probably rewrite that as defining.
Yeah, so. Defining moment. I the things that I'm proudest of are things where you kind of got a story out there that maybe, you know, you kind of, I mean, I remember wasn't wholesome, but I remember once doing going right the way back to the beginning of my career, and doing a sexual health campaign for Radio 1, and meeting somebody who meeting a young woman who's my age. I was in my early 20s at that time, in a hostel in Weston-super-Mare, and I'd gone down there to do some interviews, and it was the first person I ever met who was infected with HIV, and she was kind of, I remember that being a kind of real wow moment. That wasn't particularly wholesome, but it was telling that story and getting her story onto national radio was kind of a really really important for me, because that was that thing about actually at that stage there was an awful lot of kind of prejudice about people who had HIV. There was, you know, and AIDS was kind of like a story that was really kind of, it was a terrifying thing to a lot of people, and that was a brilliant thing just to tell somebody, you know, just let her tell her story in her own way, that she was just a really ordinary, just the same as everybody else. And that was really interesting, and really something I'm really proud of. I went to Mali in West Africa with Damon Albarn, who was the Blur lead singer, but this was before he launched Gorillaz, which is his kind of most well-known musical output now. But we went as part of an Oxfam team. He was making a program. He was making an album. He was using musicians in West Africa, meeting them and recording with them and making an album. And it was an album called Mali Music. And that was absolutely brilliant. That was really eye-opening. I'd never been to that part of the world before.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
people who were making such fantastic music in quite kind of different environments to the ones that I was used to was really that was really important. Telling that story on the BBC was brilliant as well. And then there was a documentary series, which is probably the thing I'm most proudest of, which was it was called Island Music, and it was broadcast on Radio 2. And it was around the 40th anniversary of Jamaican independence, and it was kind of a history of music, of Jamaican music from independence in the 1960s up to then the present day, and getting kind of and and the thing that I remember being most proudest of then was we were talking to quite a lot of kind of so we interviewed an awful lot of Jamaican musicians, and we went over to the island, and kind of the most annoying thing was I didn't go over to Jamaica to do the interviews. I sent somebody else, but we were interviewing a lot of Jamaican artists who sometimes spoke in quite kind of heavy patois, and there were people at Radio 2 who wanted us to to have voiceovers, basically translations of patois.
Jeez.
And I put my foot down and said, there is no way we could do this. It'd be a terrible thing to do. And that was brilliant. And that was so that's the kind of thing I'm kind of look back and go, that's the kind of proudest thing that I did.
Oh, brilliant stuff. Just a few questions as well coming from students. I mean, this is fairly, again, quite a broad one. But what would be the best way if you were starting down your career again and you want to go into podcast career path? Jack Missing asks, what was the best way? Now, I'm going to just interject. Obviously, say you come onto my course and do that. But what tips would you give for budding podcast entry to the industry now?
I think if ever, to spin it on my head, if I was looking for somebody to come and work with me, or to work as if I was interviewing somebody for a job, what are the things that I kind of that make people stand out? And I think you'd be a good person to have. One is listen to a lot of podcasts. Listen to stuff that you don't like as well as the stuff that you do like, and have a clear idea and be able to articulate what you do and don't like about podcasts, about specific podcasts, and don't be afraid of the last question that I always ask in a job interview is, what are you listening to at the moment? And if people go, oh, I'm not really, then that's kind of like a red flag. And be able to talk about stuff and talk about it, both critically, so that say what you like and what you don't like about it, and what you think works and what doesn't work. And then the next step, I would say, is probably if you're able to make, be a contributor to a podcast production. So, it'd be great if you could make your own, but if you can't, if you don't have those kind of facilities, just a lot of charities, a lot of institutions, a lot of organizations make some form of audio now. Volunteer, get involved, show that you've got an interest in making that stuff. And I think that's
absolutely.
And that would be brilliant, because then you can talk about it, but B, it also shows that you're invested in it and you've got an investment in it. And the first things that I ever did was, the work experience that I did when I was at school was, this was my first work experience when I was 16 was at the Bristol Evening Post in Bristol. It was a local newspaper, and that was a couple of days. And then the next one that I did was at GWR, which was at a local radio station in Bristol. And I think that just finding out where, whether it's Kemet FM, whether it's Radio Nottingham, whether it's anywhere that does that makes and creates stuff that you're interested in, go along and offer to help.
Absolutely. I think this is also, we've had Shane Fisher ask, how do you become friends with people in the industry, and that plays into that. you have to get your face out there, I think. Well, your
Yeah.
voice out there in this case, I suppose. And one of the things about this course, I'd just like to remind everyone who's on the call, is that we do have these facilities here, and they're not course specific as such. You know, if you want to use them, you are happy to, you know, as long as we know, as long as you tell us beforehand, we'll provide an engineer. This podcast studio I'm in right now, the TV studio and everything, they're there for you to use. And we like nothing more than when students take that initiative and actually do their own work, because there's nothing, you're in a great time of your life at the moment to build a portfolio. And it's not going to be the most professional stuff. It's not going to be great, but you're going to be practicing. You're going to go show that you're on that pathway, and you'll learn along the way. So, you know, even if you're not doing journalism particularly, this place is still for you. If you're doing journalism, definitely come and use these things.
Yeah.
I've got a question from. Oh, sorry. Did you?
No, I concur with every word you just said.
Yeah, get your face out there. I think it's another thing about, as you say, about listening to podcasts widely, not just listen to your niche podcast or your type of podcast. Listening widely is very important. Again, if you want to be a footballer, you wouldn't just, you know, sort of think you could do it and walk on the pitch. You'd watch some matches. You know, you go to games, you understand it. You know, you don't just go there with the idea of it. If you want to be a musician, you don't just sort of think, well, I might be good at this. You'll go to gigs. You'll listen to music. So it's engaging with the product you're trying to make is extremely important. But you know, I think the advice about widely is pretty good. Tiffany's got a good question here. Tiffany's one of my second years. This is how is industry improving involving ethnic minorities and people of colour? Do you think there are sort of people who would fit that description are turning more to self-funding podcasts than traditional radio? Do you think there's still a diversity issue in the?
Yes, I think there is. I think that a lot of work has been done on it, and I think organisations know that they need to do that work. So I think if you go into a BBC newsroom or BBC offices now in radio and in local radio especially, you see a much more diverse kind of workforce, which is only good. But I think but I think that thing about the barriers to entry is that you don't, you know, people from minorities don't have to wait to be given the green light by people, by gatekeepers. You know, they can go and get that, grab hold of the kind of means of production in a kind of quite communist kind of way of thinking, and kind of and do it themselves. You know, and I think the interesting, the kind of, I noticed that that the Observer magazine newspaper has just put a podcast out with a woman called Miranda Sawyer, who's a journalist who I've known for a long time. But her co-host is the creator of the Galdem podcast, and so she is now. So she's now being taken. You know, she's now kind of being brought onto kind of mainstream media after kind of creating her own platform and having loads of success there. So I think that's an interesting way of kind of that actually. Yeah. The thing is that mainstream media is really hungry for new faces and new voices, and so again, you get yourself, if you get yourself out there, you know, hopefully and you're good at it, and then you'll get picked up. So I think that to kind of go back to your question, Tiffany, there's work to be done, but I think it's going in the right direction.
Yeah. If there's, you know, there's obviously audiences for diverse views as well. So there is a market there for this. It's because one of the things journalism has a very a very strong criticism is criticised for is obviously the fact that it's not just in terms of race or gender. There's a class issue here as well. With I think it's 50% of the top 100, the top 500 people who work in commentary journalism is in the sort of the actual not on the coalface, but actually driving an editorial line, are from private schools. Stuff like, nothing wrong. I mean, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with being a private, you know, whatever your opinion, it's not really the point. They're probably good journalists, but there's still a very lack of diversity when it comes to class.
It's very, you know, it's a very limited worldview, and you know, it's
you wanted people who have lived different ways.
exactly.
But yeah, okay. Here's a couple. We've not long left, so we're going to wrap up in a second. So this is a question
This is
I've got a few
quick fire round,
times. Not a quick fire round. Yeah, okay. We'll throw some questions. There's some really weird ones coming up, so prepare yourself. One that's been asked a few times in the comments is who's the most famous person you met during your career?
I once worked on a program in terms of worldwide fame.
Yeah.
I once worked on a program on a local station called GLR, which was a local station in London, and
Yeah.
one of the guests that came into our show once was a guy called Buzz Aldrin, who was the second man to step on the moon.
Heavens, yeah.
He was kind of worldwide famous. Apart from that, I did a documentary on Radio 1 on Def Jam Records, where I met LL Cool J, which was a personal highlight for me, being as somebody who bought all his records back in the day. That in terms of other fame, yeah. I'm trying to think.
You got a lot of a buzz on. I noticed on the chat was when you mentioned Damon Albarn's name. There was a bit of a buzz there with a few people. I think Blur still, Gorillaz and Blur still have some cash out.
Massive Attack's a guy that I.
Right. Yeah.
Busta Rhymes, I've interviewed actually, so that might be someone who played Glastonbury this year. So yeah. So those are kind of So my specialism when I was at Radio 1 was black music and hip hop specifically, and I'm a big hip hop head, and it kind of like golden age stuff like Def Jam and stuff. So yeah, Method Man I've worked with, so those kind of guys, which I guess are kind of they're the people that my daughter rings up and makes me tell her friends, like people that I've never met on the phone, like when I worked with Busta Rhymes and stuff. So while she's in a bar or something.
I don't know anyone I'll reply with. So I did headbutt, I accidentally headbutt David Williams once, but that's more embarrassing.
That's a brilliant thing. I'd love to have.
Well, I mean, it's people shook my hands on the base of that, but it was an accident. Probably. And just finally, we'll wrap up now. But thank you so much. But last question is, if you could recommend to students who are interested in the media and who are interested in moving into podcasting, what podcast would you listen to right now? What do you think is really good business right now that would be worth listening to?
Well, that's a good question. I'm being